Well, it's fun to get to introduce Roger Aines. I met Roger in 1993 when the lab asked me to pull together an integrated geophysical and environmental program. And you can imagine the reaction of the geophysical and environmental scientists when they discovered they got handed over to a nuclear physicist. It was not a very good match. So I was slowly making my way through the program, learning what people did. I came upon Roger. At the time, Roger had a beautiful flowing set of dark hair that hung down to his shoulders. And he was famous because Secretary O'Leary had come to the lab one time and said, "Oh, he's beautiful." That's one, Roger. The other is Roger and his research partner were doing a wonderful subsurface cleanup program, injecting steam, cracking noxious petroleum stuff underground, stimulating bioremediation. Absolutely wonderful program. And as I fumbled my way through it in my usual freshman chemistry fashion, Roger finally looked at me and he said, "You know, Jay, one reason physicists don't make very good environmental workers is they just have no appreciation for subsurface heterogeneities. Well, I knew I was inadequate in many ways, but I'd never even heard that word. So I had to go home and practice spelling it several times because, remember, this is before Google, so you couldn't just throw some letters at the computer and get a 1,500-word essay. So the translation of subsurface heterogeneity, for those of you that don't know it, is dirt is tough. That's the essence. It's a complicated substance. So Roger and I lived through that. I had a lot of fun with this stuff. But he gave me a great gift because 5 years later I was in Washington running a combat support agency. And about once a quarter, 5 or 6 guys would show up and try to sell me a wonder-working, penetrating weapon of some sort. And there'd be 3 or 4 sweaty guys in suits and a couple of overweight lieutenant colonels with videos and view graphs, and they'd show me stuff. And I'd look for a while and I'd say, well, that's actually really a pretty good naive approach to the problem. But I notice you've not done anything about the subsurface heterogeneities. They would recoil like a vampire splashed with holy water. They never came back, Roger. So he had given me an absolutely unbelievable gift. I still can't spell the word very well. But about a year ago, when fracking appeared on the economic, legal, and environmental bandwidth of the country in a big way, I thought, here's a technology I've missed. I know one guy in this state who knows a lot about it, so I called Roger and offered my standing consultant fee of a couple of good martinis. He showed up and gave me a brief, and then he collected his consultant's fee. So I've asked Roger to come here and talk to you about the energy implications, say a bit about the environmental, say a bit about the economic implications of fracking. I think you'll find it very, very useful. Roger, you're up.
It's just too much fun to be introduced by Jay. I'm going to need that switcher there. Thank you very much. It is such a great pleasure to see you.
Yeah, just
get to the microphone.
Just hold it.
Take the mic off the stand.
Such a great pleasure to see so many friendly faces and great friends in the room. Thank you all for inviting me. That'd be fair. I'm tall enough. I could probably do.
You could do whatever you want to do. Be careful.
So we're 6 years into this phenomena that I think of as the fracking age. And the energy picture of the United States has changed dramatically. And I'm just going to give you a bit of a travel log through some of those changes. What's going on, what fracking is, and how it's changed a world that none of us grew up in. It's entirely different now. And I try to give you a sense of what that is. By the way, this is a picture of one of the fracking sites. This is one of the ones from Pennsylvania. And you see one site here, and the next one's on the next hill over. That gives you a sense of what kind of thing the thing looks like in the real world.
Roger, what's the red stuff?
The red stuff are water tanks.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the trucks that have trucked in the equipment. One of the things I'll be mentioning to you is how many truck traffic trips there are associated with it. It's one of the big environmental impacts, believe it or not. So, question. Rotary likes questions. How many new coal-fired power plants in the country this year? Zero. There's a talk about a war on coal. It's over. Coal lost. Wind, solar, gas. The availability of natural gas means new power plants are running on natural gas. And coal, zero. Next year there will be one come online that has carbon capture associated with it. It's 90% carbon capture, partially funded by the government. But that's the only one on the books that will come online in the immediate future. really coal is gone, and I'm going to tell you why that is and why I think that's a pretty long-term expectation. I don't think that's going to change no matter who's in the Senate. This is on I-5. This is one of these new gas-fired power plants that you've all driven by. It's by that water treatment plant that belongs to the city of Lodi that's right next to I-5. I bet you didn't even know it was there. 300 megawatt gas-fired power plant. It's running flat out all the time. That's one of the things that makes these things so attractive. They have a very low footprint. They're very socially acceptable. Let's zoom in on this one a little bit. You can see what it is. Basically, it's a giant jet engine. It's a GE jet engine, and the gas runs through that. That makes most of the power. And in this picture over here, I'll just walk over here, that's in just a little box right here. That's the jet engine. Everything else in the picture, you get hot gas that comes out the end of that jet engine, and you actually use that to make steam, and that makes more power. It makes about another 15 or 20% more power. But the combination of those two makes that the most efficient power plant in the world. That power plant converts 45% of its energy into electricity. Stunning number. Coal, at best, a good coal plant gets 35%. That plant is also about half the price of a coal-fired power plant.
Wow.
So it's more efficient, makes more for your money that you spend, it costs half as much, doesn't emit any mercury, doesn't emit any arsenic, and you guys didn't even know it was there. Guess why the power plants want to buy these things? Coal, coal can't begin to match that. It's done something else that I'm extremely proud of, and that is that it's helped reduce the carbon dioxide emissions in this country by a dramatic amount. In the red line up there at the top, you see our carbon dioxide emissions from the energy sector over the last couple of decades. We're climbing, 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 but for the last 5 years they've gone down dramatically. In fact, they've gone down about 800 million tons. Okay? Those are big numbers. If the U.S. had signed the Kyoto Treaty, which we didn't, we would have been the only country that even came close to meeting it. And a big part of that is natural gas. About a quarter of that is natural gas. And that's substituting for coal. You see coal dying off in these last 5 years, natural gas coming up. The other thing that's pretty remarkable, though, is petroleum going down. We're using less petroleum. This is the Prius effect. All of you who are driving those hybrids, congratulations, it works. But we're also using petroleum a lot more efficiently, and this is happening all over the world in the developed world. People are using less petroleum, less per person, less per dollar of GDP in Japan, Europe, in the United States, and North America. Certainly not true in China. Well, this natural gas phenomenon for power plants, the people who build and operate the power plants are going to have one important question, and that is it going to last? Gas is great, I can build this power plant, it's cheap, is it going to be there for me in the future? Well, there are 7 areas called shale plays. I don't know where that word comes from, I've got to ask a Texan.
Oil patch, man.
Yeah.
You play in the oil patch.
There you go. And these shale areas are one of 42. We know around the United States, there's 42 places that have shale like this that have natural gas in them, and 7 of them are producing natural gas today. Those 7, if we took everything else off the books, then we get about 20% of our natural gas in these, but if we got all of our natural gas in them, it would last for 30 years. That's on the books, we already know it's here, it's already drilled, we know about it. It's an enormous amount. Of course, there's going to be more found. Just drilling into these things for the last 5 years, we've gotten twice as much gas from every well we drilled today as we got 5 years ago. So that's not all the gas we're going to find, and it's enough to last for 30 years. And the power companies look at this and they go, okay, that's fine. We may see a little price fluctuation, but it's not going to stop, which is what they're worried about. They don't want to build these plants and then suddenly find out they don't have any gas. So this is a big part of what is driving the clean energy, but it's also driving a lot of other things in the country that we're going to talk about. But the first thing to do is to talk about what the heck this fracking is. And to do so, I want to talk about what conventional oil and gas is first. Now, conventional oil and gas, you have things from the 200 or 300 million years ago that died and fell to the bottom of the ocean. I used to think those things were dinosaurs. Unfortunately, not many of them were. But it was mostly leaves and organic material, falls to the bottom of the ocean, and it turns into a rock. The rock gets buried underneath a mountain range somewhere. It gets hot and it cooks. And these leaves cook into oil and gas. And that oil and gas is lighter than water. So if it lives in a rock like this, which is like beach sand, sandstone, you guys have all seen sandstone, then it can rise through that rock because it's lighter than the water that's already in that rock. And it rises into a bowl-shaped accumulation, a trap like this where the rocks are bent, or in a room like this would fill this room, and then you can just stick a straw in it and suck it out. And that's been the basis of the American oil industry for 100 years. But there's a lot of rocks which are too impermeable, and there's a word that I'll get Jay to Google for you. Impermeable means water won't pass through it. But the leaves and the organic material got trapped in there. It's all still there. It got cooked just as much. There's oil and gas are in that rock, but it can't get out. These rocks have about the same permeability as the shingles on your roof. Okay? It's not coming out. But we know it's there. And the question is, how do we get it out? And the answer is we break it up into as small pieces as we can get. We frack it. And by doing so, here nature made us a reservoir. Nature made this place where the oil is stored. For fracking, man has to actually make that reservoir. They drill in and have to break it up so they can get the oil and gas out of that rock. Let's talk a little bit about how that's done. Because it's not happening too much in California today. You don't get to go out and drive around like you do in Pennsylvania and see it. The first breakthrough was the ability to drill a horizontal well. What do I mean by this? I mean they go down about a mile and then turn the drill stem over a very tight radius, over 1,000 yards maybe, turn it horizontal, and they could run that thing horizontal. They could stay inside this room for 2 miles. They could even stay inside the rock if it curves and bends for that kind of distance. It's amazing how accurate they can be. So they can follow this very tight rock, this oil shale that we were talking about, and stay within there and access the rock. But that still doesn't get anything out of this shingle material that we want to get it out of. We still have to break it. And in order to break it, they pump water in at high pressure into a small area inside that horizontal well now. And the water pressure reaches a high enough pressure to actually break the rock open and drive fractures in it. So now we access a lot of the rock. The rock stays there, it doesn't move, but it has fractures. They're about a ½ inch across and can be hundreds of yards long. The fractures tend to be vertical because that's the weakest way of the rock. Imagine all that rock is pressing down on this area from all the thousands of feet above, and so the rock wants to break sideways because that turns out to be the easiest way to break. So the fractures end up vertical, but they don't go all that far. A couple hundred yards, and I want to point out the scale on this figure. If this truck and everything was the same scale as the well, the truck would be 750 feet tall. These are very deep. They're miles deep underground. And so, what's happening down here, and the fractures don't come anywhere near the surface. And the issues around groundwater and some of the environmental issues that we'll talk about later, are from the surface equipment, from the surface kit. It's not to do with the actual fracturing down below, which doesn't come anywhere near it. It's from all that stuff on the surface, like the picture that I showed you at the beginning. With all those truck trips, you have 1,000 truck trips. How many of them have to spill something in the creek for you to have a groundwater problem? That's where the issue arises. So I want to tell a story, though, about this fracking equipment that you see. I was visiting Baker Hughes, which is one of the companies that provides this hydraulic pumping service. And they said, would you like to see how we build a frac pump? I said, well, of course I would. We go out back, and they have this great big shed. And it's got tractor trailers pulled in from either side, and they're building things on top of them. And they said, we get the biggest trailer that's legal in wherever we're going to be using this thing. And then we put the biggest diesel engine that we can get onto that trailer. That's typically the diesel engine from a GE locomotive. The diesel engine is the size of the entire trailer. Then they put a radiator on top of that that's the size of the entire engine. And then they put a pump on the back. It's just a direct drive pump. It's about the size of that table. It's not very big at all. And just runs right off the shaft of the motor. And I said, oh, okay, so that's a frac pump. They said, oh, no. We ganged 20 of those together. That's a frac pump.
Wow.
20 GE locomotives. The important part about fracking that comes up, you'll hear about sand, and even when you break these fractures open, of course, they close right up again if you didn't do something in them. So they inject a lot of sand into them. Typically, 1 million pounds of sand goes into one of these wells that holds those fractures open once you create them. But the big story here is not gas, it's petroleum, because in every one of those wells they discovered that they can get petroleum out of that rock as well as natural gas. And this is the story of petroleum consumption in the United States and petroleum production. And this is everybody in the room remembers this period. This is when we hit our peak oil production in the United States. And after we hit that peak production, our demand kept rising. So every year in our lives, we used more oil and we produced less. And this set the tone for energy policy in this country. Every year it was worse. It was a game of musical chairs. Every year there was one less chair, and you had to do something about it. And this reached its peak about 5 years ago, when we were importing 16 million barrels of oil a day, $100 a barrel, remember? And fortunately, we'd stopped doing things like using oil to make electricity back here. That's why that spike was going up, but not every year. But we were still using an enormous amount. But today, it's not true anymore. Today, every year we use less oil, dramatically less oil. That's the Prius effect. And every year we're producing more. That oil is coming out of those fracked wells. Because now we know we can get not just gas, but we can get oil, and the target has become the oil. Now this has an interesting effect. You're going after expensive oil, but they're getting gas anyway, and so the gas is cheap because the gas is a byproduct. They're really going after the oil and producing all that extra gas. These two numbers here are important. 5 years ago, 16 million. Today, 11 million. 5 million barrels a day. $100 a barrel. That's $500 million a day we're not sending overseas anymore. You want to know why this technology gets strong support on both sides of the House and the Senate? Democrats and Republicans will both stand up and praise this technology. Democrats because it's going to be the death of King Coal, and the Republicans because it's a new age of abundance. But they both like it, and it's that $500 million a day that is making this country a wealthier place and making the rest of the world is still struggling. But this is one of the big things why we're recovering right now. But it's not that easy, is it? There's environmental concerns associated with this, and we've all heard this. Why are there so many environmental concerns about this? It's giant industry. You saw what one of those sites looks like. There's thousands and thousands of those sites. And it's big oil. And the question is, in a new age of abundance, in an age where the United States has an enormous amount of underground wealth that we're producing, do we trust today's oil companies to produce that wealth in our behalf? And the answer is no, of course we don't. So there's an enormous amount of concern about this. A lot of the environmental concerns are real because it's big industry, and a lot of the environmental concerns are basically, do we trust oil? No, we don't. We're going to fight big oil at every chance we can get. And this is the kind of thing that you see in these headlines here. Let me talk about three of the things that I think are some very significant concerns that we have to deal with. First of these is this truck traffic. If you live in a rural community and there's 1,000 of these giant trucks, remember it's the biggest trailer that they can possibly put on the roads near you. 1,000 trips for each well, that's an enormous impact. The state of Pennsylvania has finally figured out that they should deal with this by just, before you even apply for a permit, the fee to apply for a fracking permit is $50,000. You don't get anything for that. You get to submit the paperwork. But they finally figured out there's a lot of money being made. We should be improving our roads. We should be doing things like this. But these are the roads in around that area that I showed you this picture. All kinds of new roads being built in rural Pennsylvania. So that's a big impact. And of course, this is where the real environmental impact is, because you dump one tractor-trailer load of chemicals into a creek, and no amount of drilling is ever going to make up for that. But water is the landmark concern. It's the thing that everybody always talks about, because you use a lot of water in driving one of those frac wells, and most of that water comes back. What goes in is shown over here on the right. It's goo. Why is it goo? Because it has to hold that sand. Remember I told you I had to put 1 million pounds of sand in there. The sand won't go unless the water is pretty gooey. And so they make it exactly the same stuff that's in your McDonald's shake. I know none of you drink McDonald's shakes, but you know what I mean. It's guar gum. And there was a while actually where the food industry was getting upset with the oil industry because they were using all the guar gum. The guar producers in India figured that one out pretty fast, and it's now come back into balance. But that guar gum has to be broken down before you can pull it out again, so they put an oxidizer in the well to break it down, and what comes out of the well is basically degraded snot. It's got all the chemicals that you have in there, and the chemicals are mainly soap. surfactants, things to make things move better, some things to kill bacteria, bactericides, and those are pretty, I mean, they kill stuff, okay? They're really not nice chemicals. And then a bunch of things that sort of just manage the friction and things. But it comes out together, it's all mixed together, and so instead of treating this, in a lot of places, Oklahoma in particular, they just throw it away. How do they throw it away? They inject it deep underground, even deeper than the fracking wells, down into the basement rocks, and they never stop. In the fracking industry, they stop when the rock breaks. It breaks, you stop, good, we move to the next place, break it again. The disposal wells just keep pumping day and night, day and night, day and night. And guess what? They're causing earthquakes all over Oklahoma. Oklahoma just exceeded California for the number of earthquakes this year. Man-made. Real problem, absolutely unacceptable. There's no reason anybody should put up with that. This is water that can be treated, and it's a difference of spending 10 cents a gallon instead of 5 cents a gallon to throw it away. It's ridiculous, and I'll stomp up and down about that one. There's just no reason to tolerate that, and nobody ever should. And if fracking ever occurs in California, we already have rules in place to insist upon that. Canada recycles every drop they ever use. Just no reason not to do it. And the last is, you're producing natural gas, but natural gas is also a greenhouse gas. Methane in the atmosphere produces about a quarter of the current warming that we're worried about. Why don't we hear more about methane? Because it's supposed to be short-lived. It's supposed to go away in 7 years. It has a half-life of 7 years in the atmosphere. Well, that's fine if we stop emitting it, but we aren't. And so as that losses from pipelines and losses from operations, these are the view from space of the Bakken Formation in North Dakota. You can see it's lit up like Minneapolis, St. Paul from the flares where they're burning off natural gas that they can't get to pipelines. That's also a travesty that you're just burning this stuff instead of using it. But that gives you a sense of the magnitude of it. And that's a big concern. There's an environmental issue there as well as an economic issue. Well, I'm going to leave you with a final thing. This has all been all about the United States and all about energy and the economy. What about international relations? This is one that I find very interesting. Liquid natural gas tankers. They compress it down to a liquid, put it inside one of these giant ships. There are 350 of these ships on the seas today and 190 in construction right now. The Koreans love this business. And one of those ships can carry 5% of Europe's daily need for natural gas in one ship. Okay? So with 390 of them on the ocean, it's entirely reasonable that the United States could supply all of Europe's natural gas if they chose to. Why do we care about this? Because of Vladimir Putin. He has for years had his hand on the valve on those pipelines that go into Europe, and that's been his control over what happens in Europe. And twice in the last decade, he's turned that valve off, and we've all seen what happens. Now, he knows perfectly well that he gets to do it one more time. Next time he does it, the American public will say, the heck with that, we're going to open our ports to exporting natural gas. Turns out we already have all those ports because we built them to import natural gas back when we thought we needed to import it. And if the government authorizes those exports, we could just be exporting natural gas to Europe. Now, of course, the companies that make it want to export it to Japan, where they pay $17. The wholesale price is $17 cubic foot, whereas a million cubic foot. And here it's $3.50. So they'd really like to export. In fact, it's almost $12 in Europe. So they're going to make a lot of money. So this is a very interesting impact, and it's one of the reasons that you see Russia doing some of the things that it does now, because it doesn't have this option anymore, and they just built or agreed to build 2 giant pipelines into China, so basically to diversify their market. And this is, I think, something that you're going to see play out more in the future. This is not going to end. You remember the days when OPEC held the control of the economics of the world? It's the United States today, and it's a new responsibility for all of us. Well, I just want to leave you with a sense that this is not the energy world we grew up in. It's a very different place. It's a world of abundance for the United States anyway. It's a world where the economics of natural gas and oil are changing what's happening in this country dramatically. It's a world where our children have an opportunity to grow up both in a cleaner environment, one that's run on natural gas instead of on coal, and also in an economy that's stronger because we have a lot more of these resources and we're not sending so much of that money overseas. Thank you very much.
Roger, can you take some questions?
Certainly.
Peter?
Why is all this fracking oil occurring in northern America?
Repeat the question.
Can it happen
Do we have a
all over the world?
microphone?
So the question is, why is fracking only occurring in North America? Part of it is because it's really hard to do, and the Americans figured out how to do it. All that equipment, all that technology. The rocks seem to occur in a lot of other places. China, Poland, France, Argentina all seem to have the rocks. They haven't figured it out. They're working on it hard, though. China's going to get it. China's going to figure this out. The second thing is interesting, though. In a lot of countries, you don't own the subsurface under your house. The government owns it. And in Australia, this is what they found. When they wanted to start fracking in Australia, they came in and people said, hell no, because in the United States, when you want to frack underneath my house, I get paid. And that makes the deal look a lot more interesting. In Australia, they were just not going to get anything. So that's a big deal for why it's happening, is particularly in the Commonwealth countries.
Bill?
Given the fact that these natural gas oil wells still produce CO2, will this have an impact on the amount of money and resources we apply to better energy systems that are given the climate change issues?
Yeah, one of the things that I would really like to see happen in this age of abundance is that we take some of the money that comes into this and gets used to develop better technology to manage the carbon dioxide. The natural gas is helping because it's half the emissions of coal. It's already better than coal. But petroleum is petroleum. Every pound we take out of the ground makes 3 pounds of carbon dioxide. So that's a concern, and it's an opportunity we should take.
Why is it, do you think, that the oil companies are still getting rebates from the government?
Politics. I won't go any further than that.
Okay, so Kathy Quote.
I wanted to get back to this CO2. I have family that live near or in the Bakken, and they've been approached about sequestration. They're currently sitting on top of something that could store a lot of CO2. Do you have any concerns about that, or the other gases that might be intermingled with that?
My day job is working on that. The issue around sequestration is almost exactly the issues around oil and gas. It's a very similar kind of thing. You're taking carbon dioxide, compressing it back down to a liquid that looks a lot like petroleum, and putting it underground. And so the equipment and the infrastructure do it very similar. The safety issues around it are very similar, which is to say it's not entirely safe, but we understand what those safety issues are. And so it's something that I think this country can and should pursue.
Okay, so we have time for one more question. Mark?
You noted on the graph there that our consumption and our production are closing in on each other. We've heard that we're very close in North America to having sort of a crossover point of being net neutral on energy production versus consumption. Do you ever see a time when the United States itself would produce all of the energy that it consumes within its borders?
We're even if you look at that curve, we're still 10 or 15 years away, and that requires us to stay on those sharp trajectories. So I don't think so. I think we're going to be importing energy for quite a while. But it's that game of, every year we import less, and so it's easier.
Well, thank you, Roger, for coming today.